You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by FreightPlus. I'm your host, Kyle McNaught. Thanks for checking us out. In today's episode, old friend of the show and practicing director for security and resilience at BSI, Tony Pelli, is going to come on and discuss the topic that has everyone buzzing right now, holiday shipping. In this conversation, Tony's going to use his specialty of assessing risk in global supply chains and provide some context about what's happening in this upcoming season, including the risk factors contributing to the impact, why this year is predicted to be worse than last year, and then how do you address the risk as a company? So, hey, Tony, how's it going?
Good, Kyle. How are you?
You know what? It's been a year, but like we were saying before, not much has changed somehow, even though it's been a year since we've seen each other. Other than I think both of us got a haircut was the big thing.
We did. Yeah. I made sure. I was like, you gotta have the shorter hair for the podcast this time.
Same. I had to make sure the beard wasn't as monstrous as it was last time. Tony, for the audience that doesn't know you, give a quick little kind of summary about yourself and what you're doing at BSI.
Yeah. So my name is Tony Pelli. I am the National Practice Director for Security and Resilience at BSI. So I lead a team of consultants that helps our clients with their supply chain related issues, whether it's risk management or specifically in security. Also help our clients out with their physical security, business continuity, and emergency management needs.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're the codes and standards guy. It's all that stuff. I love the risk management stuff. And I mean, like I said in the intro, we're going to talk about a big risk management, something that I think is going to affect a ton of people, holiday shopping. I mean, it's nothing new. The holiday shopping rush is something that we experience every year, right? I mean, Jingle All the Way, all these movies built around the hot toy and stuff. But this upcoming season seems to be shaping up to be kind of a new level of, I hate to say it, but suck. I mean, it's a dumpster fire of logistics and stuff, but help break down kind of what are the risk elements? Why is this going to be such an impact holiday season? Why is it going to be so bad this year?
Well, I think there's a few different risk factors that are contributing to why it might be a little worse this year than it was last year. I mean, last year we were really in the sort of throes of COVID during the holiday season, but we weren't seeing the same types of disruptions that we're seeing this year. So I think that's just the different factors that are compounding in order to bring about the risks this year. So every day it seems like there's a new thing. The most recent one has been sort of electricity issues in China, which is shutting down production in a lot of different places. And the other big one is just sort of consumer demand. So consumer demand has been much higher than it was in previous years, which means that during the holiday shipping season, which really has already passed almost, it's really sort of July, August, September, and then into the early part of September. There's just sort of a rush of ships that are coming towards the United States, that are coming towards Western Europe. And so we're seeing a lot of congestion there. That's contributing a lot as well. And then in the peak of the sort of production season, what we were seeing as well was shutdowns at Chinese ports due to COVID in some cases. We're also seeing shutdowns at Vietnamese factories as well, also largely due to COVID. So the countries that were not hit quite so bad in the first two waves of COVID or so in 2020 are now experiencing much more COVID than they were previously. And are being forced to shut down factories or take extraordinary measures in order to contain COVID in those places. And that's sort of stacked on top of a lot of pre-existing issues, like we're seeing a container shortage, for example, and just sort of containers in the wrong places, not able to be where they need to be, and it's putting pressure on the entire supply chain.
It's insane. I mean, it's like you say, we're about to approach Golden Week with China and stuff. When this podcast releases, it's the start of that week-long kind of break. So essentially, most shippers know, like, hey, if I need to get my materials, my supplies out of China, I'm in trouble now. And like you're saying, it's already the holiday rush. One thing that's interesting to me, or something that, like, I think, especially given your kind of background, is identifying where it's coming from. What would you sort of say is the root cause kind of impacting everything? Because I know there's so many things between e-commerce, buying habits changing. I mean, that demand. Where could kind of a company look at, like, why is this so different? How do I explain to my higher ups, this is what is so different about what, like, even yet last year?
Yeah, and I think I think the real root of the issue is sort of a shift in consumer habits, really. So away from buying services and towards buying actual physical products, whether those products are cars, whether those products are, plastic rubber duckies. They're just buying more stuff, basically. So that's sort of the root of the issue there. And in terms of explaining to your management, why this is happening, I think that's not a particularly satisfying explanation. It's just kind of like, okay, well, we make physical products. So then
Right.
what's the problem? We should be doing okay. It's just that there's not sort of the normal flows of trade like you would see in a typical year. Everything's going to one place all at the same time. And so companies are having to take some pretty extraordinary measures. So companies that would normally never think about using air freight, like apparel companies, are having to thinking about using air freight. For example, we've also seen cases where even shipping from North America to South America, we're seeing companies move from what they would previously do with either air freight or with container shipping, and moving to over the road shipping, because that's even though it's still constrained, is still less constrained than those other modalities. So I think people are getting creative in terms of how they're shipping things like chartering entire ships, those sorts of things. To just guarantee that they have the space available in order to ship things to where they need to be.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard plenty of creative things, and then, like you say, it's just it's not your higher ups, your executive team isn't going to want to hear that. Like, hey, like this is a bad thing. Like to them, demand's always going to be a good thing. Yeah, we want sales, we want all this stuff. It's awesome they went from buying services to buying goods, but it's how do you plan for that? That seems to be kind of that headache, that thing that's keeping all supply chain kind of operators up at night, because what are you supposed to do?
Yeah, and I think there's a few different answers to that. Some of which are more short term, some of which are more long term. And I think the short term one is, even if you have to pay more for it or pay a premium for it, booking space basically for transportation as far ahead of time as possible. So work on those relationships with your third party logistics companies. Ensure that you have that space sort of when you need it, and that's one of the more short term things. I think medium and longer term, this may make companies look a little bit more about where they're sourcing from. So instead of sourcing solely from China or sourcing solely from Vietnam, maybe having sort of more of a multi-sourcing strategy where you're sourcing from a number of different countries, or even building some redundancy into the supply chain as well. So if there's an issue happening in one country, you can shift to another supplier fairly easily. And obviously, that's another thing that management may not want to hear, because that's not always cost effective.
Right.
But that's something that we are seeing as sort of an emerging strategy. The other thing, and the third thing that I think will take even longer to maybe develop, is nearshoring. So thinking about opening that factory in Mexico, or working with suppliers in Mexico, or working with suppliers in Eastern Europe, for example, if you're in Europe. But of course, that's a multi-year undertaking and not something that can be fixed, overnight or even within a couple weeks.
Yeah, and I know you recently kind of wrote a little bit about this in the Chain magazine article, which was pretty interesting to me, because, like you say, it's not just securing the supplies, right? It's the logistic backlog. It's this bottleneck of, depends on what mode you bring in it, but even tracking, even one of those more reliable ones, it's they're all dealing with tremendous capacity issues. I mean, good for them, right? They get to kind of pick and choose what they want, but you still have to be very smart. You're going to have a really good relationship. It's something that is so interesting to me. Kind of back to some of those 3 points you said, like, we've heard it all, right? We've heard like, hey, pay a little more price, but sometimes companies can't handle that. And then I was reading an article you actually even you shared recently, where it was one in Bloomberg, where the logistics manager was talking about how, like, you know what, it's sometimes it helps me out because the higher price most companies can't handle, and I just happen to have, like, I make higher, like I can spend that dollar, so I'm getting a little more capacity, but
Mhm.
it still turns into that bottleneck. I mean, I wish there was a question I really had, but there's no
Well,
place. Like, it's just the risk you see. I mean, where's the higher risk? What is it right now? Just get the stuff here and then you can figure it out, because eventually the logistics kind of works out. Or are you seeing, like, I know we talk nearshore, I know we talk multi sourcing, but is there a bigger risk cost wise, uh, focusing more on kind of where you're supplying, or is there a bigger risk on the logistics side of things right now?
So I would say there's probably more risk on the logistics side right now. That's where you seem to see most of the hits, basically. And any solution for the sourcing side or the supplier side is by its very nature going to be a bit more long term. So that'll require, potentially, shifting the way that your supply chain works overall. With logistics, it's just sort of like that Bloomberg article is just get me a container now. Like I just
Right.
need one. I
Get me
need
a
one right.
box.
Yeah, I need
Right.
one right. I need one right now. And that's a much more short-term issue. That's I think more difficult to deal with. And you mentioned sort of getting stuff over to the States. Even if you can do that, because of the cost of building materials and things like that, it's very hard to secure warehouse space now as well. So even if you wanted to keep the keep using your same supply chain, it would be difficult to find a place to store all of that stuff in the U.S. and of course expensive there as well. So it is tough, and I think each company is finding out for themselves, what the most appropriate solution is. For some of them, like you said, may be able to pay more. Some of them may just have to take the delays and hope it doesn't happen again next year, or plan for it to not happen again next year. But I think it is really focusing companies on their supply chain, something that I think they'd previously thought was sort of automatic, like it just works, it just happens, is not something that we can take for granted anymore.
Oh no, absolutely not. And that's one of the more interesting topics I've been discussing recently on this podcast. It's something that we've grown up thinking of it as a machine, but it's made up of people. And I think that's
Yeah.
one thing to keep in mind. At the end of the day, they're dealing with COVID outbreaks. I mean, like we talk about the Delta variant, natural disasters, equipment short. They're dealing with, it's not just this machine, like, which is something that I think a lot of executive kind of higher level C-suite companies are starting to have to remember of, like, hey, this thing that we kind of were able to push off to the side, we have to think about. One tip that you gave in another article, well, the Chain magazine that we mentioned earlier, but I love this idea that you kind of said of how do you stay agile, and a clear statement of goals is key. Dive a little bit more into that. Explain to me kind of what you meant by, like, why that's so vital to have an agile supply chain.
Yeah, so I think that manifests itself differently in different industries, but sort of having a clear goal in mind in terms of what do we need to do with our supply chain. So if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, you want to make sure that you can get drugs to patients before they expire, basically, right? And sort of
Right.
that's your clear goal there. With a retailer, maybe we want to serve as many customers as possible in as many different locations as possible. So thinking about, well, what will help you do that? It may be a DC bypass strategy where you're going directly to the stores for a retailer if you have the space to do that. For a pharmaceutical company, it may mean opening a manufacturing on different continents, so you're better able to serve customers in those different areas, or changing your distributor relationships so you're more agile in terms of accessing new markets or being able to get drugs into a country where you previously weren't able to. But I think it does all start from that clear statement of kind of, what are we trying to do with our supply chain? Like you said, it's not something that's automatic, that you can just say, okay, it gets things from point A to point B. It has to be, your strategy has to be tailored, and your risk management has to be tailored to what it is you're trying to do with your industry and with your specific company as well.
Yeah, no, it's vital. Culturally, I mean, one thing that we hear a lot, especially in the logistics side, because that's kind of where we come from with FreightPlus, is the whole kind of just on time shipping, or kind of like exactly when the consumer wants it. Is that, especially as someone who your job is to assess risk, what's your feeling on that? I mean, especially the Amazon effect. We talk about that. What do you like? Just you and me at a bar. Are you kind of annoyed at that, especially when it comes to kind of risk of global supply chains?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I definitely get annoyed with. And in speaking with our clients, they get annoyed with it as well. Just that, like, sometimes it pays to be a little bit inefficient, or a little bit more inefficient in some cases. And we work with like a furniture retailer, for example, that their turnover in their warehouses is just very, very slow. They own all their own warehouses. It's not being run by a 3PL. And 2 years ago, I was like, that's crazy. Like, they're just holding on to so much of this inventory, and now they probably look like geniuses because they've got all this inventory that they can get out to customers quickly, and don't have to wait on a container ship, or a container from China, or somewhere overseas to ship it over to them. So I do think that, yeah, I mean, as much as you can, sort of, we always sort of stress to our clients, as much as you can, quantify the cost of just-in-time shipping when something like this does happen. So over time, and it's hard because our brains are wired to see, okay, every month this is costing me this much money, instead of looking at that sort of low probability but very catastrophic event where it costs you millions or billions of dollars. So just sort of emphasizing the cost of those types of events, because even though they're still low probability or low frequency, like we've said, I think they'll continue happening. I don't think there's really an end in sight for these type of supply chain disruptions. And with things like climate change, increased frequency of more severe or extreme natural disasters, it's something that I think we're going to continue to see happening well into the future, even if we're not thinking about, okay, will the container shortage or will the port congestion clear up in the next 6 months?
Now, this is something we didn't really talk about beforehand, but I'm just interested, given the kind of you got so many clients you're talking out there. How have you seen an educational shift uh, in terms of how C-level kind of the C-levels at companies, not C-level companies, but C-level executives in companies? How are they starting to understand supply chain issues a little bit more? Are they able to get a little more nuanced from like the last time we talked? I don't know why I am talking funky, but the last time we talked in 2020, and now in 2021, are you seeing a little more of a sophistication coming from kind of everyone in this in organizations when it comes to the kind of supply chain and the disruptions?
Yeah, I think there's definitely more recognition of the importance of supply chain. Something that can't be taken for granted. And it's not just about how quickly how quickly and how cheaply did we get something from point A to point B without damaging it. That there's a little bit more to it than that. Whether that translates into actual nuance, I'm not really sure. I think that they're still looking at sort of whatever the issue of the day is, because at the end of the day, they are still thinking, hey, we need to get products to consumers. And I think it is still hard for people in the C-suite to look beyond sort of the next few weeks or the next few months in terms of planning for supply chain. I think that's probably happening more at a sort of VP or director level, as people are really thinking about how do we solve these supply chain problems. But I absolutely think it should be on the radar of people in the C-suite. And I think it really began with COVID, which is just such an immediate shock, and saying, okay, well, how is our supply chain going to handle this? How is our business as a whole going to handle this? And now it really hasn't stopped. So I think it's the mindset shift is happening. Whether it's translating into more nuance and thinking about the supply chain, I'm not so sure. But I do think the fact that issues like this are unlikely to go away, or in fact, in some cases, may get worse, will keep it top of mind for people. The same way that an issue like cybersecurity has become, top of mind for C-suite over the past few years, just because of the number and severity of issues and incidents that we're seeing.
Now, to flip it and kind of where I'll start to wrap up is what about the consumer side, especially kind of just you and I, general Joe Schmoes going around the things, stuff like the Suez Canal, toilet paper. I mean, the supply chain issues are front and center to where your grandmother, my grandmother, are probably like they're contacting us. My mother's like actually talking to me about my job all of a sudden. How important or how beneficial do you think kind of this like what were these wounds we're experiencing right now in supply chain can be to that kind of root cause factor that's causing a lot of issues, which is kind of that consumer buying habits and like the expectation levels that consumers have right now. Are you seeing any changes there, given the amount of news we're seeing?
Not really any changes. I do think there's a bit more understanding of, hey, why is my couch going to take 4 months to get to me,
Right.
than there was previously. I think people got so used to, like you said, the Amazon effect of, I'll have it next day. Um, but I don't think there's been a whole lot of change, and I don't know if there will be a lot of change, because it's just the e-commerce model has become more popular for a reason, because it's a lot more convenient for consumers. It's easier for consumers. I do think in conversations I've had, people are more aware of sort of the like we talked about earlier, that human element in supply chain is, it's like, oh, I go to an office and do my job. There's somebody who goes to a factory in Vietnam and does their
Right,
job, and
right.
somebody who goes to a port to unload containers and does their job. And I think that has maybe made consumers a bit more understanding of the delays, but I don't know if it's caused them to change their behavior necessarily.
Those damn Amazon drones made all consumers think that it's a drone that's flying there. What do you mean this is hard for us?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, we talk a lot, especially, I mean, one of the things we preach a lot to our clients is like, hey, one way you can really help yourself out right now with the kind of congestion is lead time. Like, help carriers
Yeah.
understand like the longer lead time they can have, the more they can plan out for this. But as consumers, we're like, nope, I went online, I want this right away. I mean, I thought it
Yeah.
was great because I ordered my Halloween costume like last week. And I'm like, all right, I got time. But we'll see what happens, right? Tony, I
Yeah.
can't thank you enough. I know it's probably your every single day is probably you're as tired as everyone working the supply chain right now. So I really appreciate your time. Uh, for the audience listening or even watching, how can they get in touch with you? Or what's a really good way to kind of keep up to date with everything you're putting out at BSI?
Yeah, so you can find me on my LinkedIn. It's just Tony Pelli. I post sort of articles of interest there, work that we're doing there, in terms of what we can talk about. We have a fairly regular series of webinars that we run on issues like this, and also our screen team, which is our supply chain risk intelligence, who are a big help for even myself just staying on top of the issues that are happening in the supply chain. They produce news on a daily basis about these types of issues. So that's probably the best way to stay in touch with BSI and also with what's going on in the supply chain.
Dude, a resource like that is invaluable. I mean, at this
Yeah.
time, like even you and I'm writing out my overview, and you're like, "All right, what about the China electric problem?" I'm like, "Oh, cool! I get to read about that." Like, it's invaluable to have a one resource hub that you guys are providing there. So I highly, highly recommend it, and definitely highly recommend following you on LinkedIn. I mean, that article, the Bloomberg article, was something that you shared. I was able to kind of go right in there and be like, "Oh, this is awesome article." I had to find a workaround to get behind the firewall because I've been looking at too many Bloomberg articles, but definitely recommend following you. Tony, I can't appreciate your time. Thank you so much for you talking to me today.
Yeah. Thank you for talking to me. Hope you have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. And that's our show. What do you think's the root factor causing the most impact in the supply chain for this upcoming holiday season? Let us know in the comments section. In the meantime, subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle McNaught. Rock and roll.